Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon here in our offices in the Bronx, New York. It is May 23rd, early in the morning, about midnight, but I ran into a story I really wanted to share with you. I know everyone's focused on Trump, but I think this is just as important, if not more important, for the Middle East and for the United States. I hope you'll join us as we discuss that. If this is the first time you're seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out across all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear what you have to say about all of the issues that affect all of us. And we hope you'll join us this Sunday as we reach out worldwide. Obviously, this week has been dominated by the news that Donald Trump will be heading into the Bronx, New York, tomorrow, Thursday, and he will be meeting with constituents and many supporters throughout all of New York City. Now, this is a big deal because New York City and New York State are considered progressive strongholds. They are bluer than blue states, and we haven't seen any Republican president win New York State, New York City, since Ronald Reagan. So this would be substantial. And he was brought to the Bronx, of course, by many Black and Hispanic supporters, as we covered on Saturday. We do hope you'll see our live stream coverage of that. But while that is happening and dominating much of the news here in the United States, there is other news that is affecting the United States and the world that is equally as important, perhaps even more important for many reasons, and that is the Gaza pier. Now, we found out on Friday, May 17th, that the Gaza pier is now finished. It was completed, but to understand the impact of the Gaza pier at this moment, and going forward, we have to go backwards in time. So let's take a step backwards. We actually have to go back to March 5th of 2024. That was Super Tuesday. And on Super Tuesday, we saw that both Democrats and Republicans were going to the primaries and they were voicing their opinion. Now, this is critical because in Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan in particular, Rashida Tlaib's constituents, they had a problem with Joe Biden, just like Harvard and Cornell University, Columbia University, and Binghamton University, many of the colleges across this nation. They had a problem that Joe Biden wasn't helping Hamas and the people of Palestine. Now, you may say, well, that seems a little bit odd considering that Hamas killed 34 Americans, took another at least 22 Americans hostage. Several of them, we fear, are dead at this moment, even as Hamas refuses to release the hostages that would guarantee a ceasefire in the war that Hamas started. Well, even given these facts and this reality, we still see that college universities and, of course, the Dearborn, Michigan Democrats were still upset and are, to this day, still upset with Joe Biden. And as such, they said they would vote uncommitted and promised that they would not vote for Joe Biden in November unless he did something to appease their feelings. On March 5th, they followed through with that message, voting 101,000 of them voting uncommitted. Now, that sent a signal because that 101,000 votes is the difference between Joe Biden being competitive in the state of Michigan or losing to Donald Trump if the numbers that we see from the primaries, Republican and Democratic primaries, are to be consistent in the November election. With the uncommitted voting against or not voting for Joe Biden, we would see that Donald Trump would have a clear advantage of well over 125,000 votes and therefore would carry the state. So Joe Biden felt he had to do something. He had to find a way to appease these individuals while still looking like he wasn't bending over backwards for Hamas, a terrorist organization that killed American citizens. 2 days after the Michigan primaries, Joe Biden had the State of the Union. Now, this was timed to match up with his apparent success in the Super Tuesday primary. Of course, he's the only candidate that was allowed by the Democratic Party in any serious manner. So he won, and he used that momentum to go into the State of the Union on March 7th. And in March 7th, Joe Biden referred to Gaza 8 times. In particular, he was referring to the Gaza pier and support of the Palestinian people with humanitarian aid. He wasn't mentioning the fact that Hamas was in a war that they started with Israel. He only mentioned twice the American hostages, and very briefly mentioning that he was trying to get them home. That was it. But he spent roughly about 5, almost 6 minutes in his State of the Union speech to try and implore upon the American people that he had an obligation to help the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, to survive a war their government, their duly elected government, Hamas, a terrorist organization, had started. And what you can see on the screen right now is from the State of the Union speech by Joe Biden, emphasizing his support of the Gaza pier. Again, we can see this is a virtue signal. Joe Biden saw that he would be in danger of losing swing states because of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party voting against him because they supported Hamas, and he had to win them back. And in doing so, he had to spend taxpayer dollars. He had to support terrorist organizations that killed Americans without referring to the torture of Americans, the sexual abuse of Americans, the murder of Americans due to Hamas itself. It was a tightrope, but he had very good speechwriters, and he was able to walk that tightrope, knowing fully that the mainstream news media would support him and not ask difficult questions about this. Of course, with that said, the real question came up is, how much will this cost? We had an idea of the time frame. It would take approximately 90 days, but what we didn't understand is, how much would it cost the United States? Now, there is also another question. Why is it the burden of the United States to take care of Hamas? Obviously, if the Palestinian issue is an international issue, other countries could have built the pier. Most notably, Egypt, which shares a border with Gaza and has access to the waterways. They could have built the pier to help the Palestinian people if they cared. So could Jordan, and there are other nations throughout the Middle East, and of course, Europe, that could have been involved. They're far closer to the conflict zone and are more readily available. But the entire burden was only on the United States because Joe Biden unilaterally made the decision to build the pier, and he put it on the backs of the American people. The result was that the pier would cost $320 million. This is double the amount that was initially expected for it to cost. So not only did he spend money, he wastefully spent American payers' tax dollars, spending twice as much as what was initially estimated to build a so-called temporary pier, which would facilitate getting in food and water and fuel into Gaza, which we know is often appropriated by Hamas to help its military conquest, its military goal of genocide of Israel and anyone who doesn't believe in the religion that Hamas believes in. $320 million may not seem like a lot of money to the United States, which spends $6.8 trillion, but realistically, we're talking about the amount of money that some nations in the world have as their GDP. Let me again emphasize, $320 million may not seem like a lot to America, where we spend $6.8 trillion on our budget, but obviously it is significant, especially when it's coming directly from taxpayers. But we have to also understand that this money, this aid, the food and water, the fuel, some of it will be going to fund Hamas, a terrorist organization, the duly elected government of Gaza by the Palestinian people. And that aid sometimes is because the Hamas will go and steal the food, the fuel, the water from its own people. There is video evidence of this. It has been reported as recently as December of 2023, but it is something that has been happening in the past as well. As daunting as that may be, to see that the United States is once again indirectly funding terrorism, much like the Iran nuclear deal, according to then Secretary John Kerry, what we see is a virtue signaling problem that has gone from the conception all the way through to the finish. Because now that the pier has been built, the $320 million has been spent, well, now no food is actually getting to the Gazan people, the Palestinians, where they're not getting any of the fuel, the food, or the water, and that's a problem. Now, we know this for a fact because this has been reported by the Pentagon, it has been reported by CNN, and so we know this is a fact. It is internationally reported. Part of the problem, as reported by CNN itself, is that the Gazan people, the Palestinians, don't believe this is real. They don't believe they're getting any food, any fuel, any water from the Biden-Harris administration. They don't trust them. They think something else is happening. And therefore, whenever any of the aid trucks that did attempt to unload the humanitarian aid tried to deliver it, well, the Gazan people hijacked the trucks. They stole the food, the water, and the fuel. It never reached its destination. So while some may have gotten it, and many suspect that during this looting spree, there were some individuals from Hamas that were taking part in this looting to be able to top off the reserves of Hamas. But whether it's Hamas directly or indirectly, or whether it's just the people, the Palestinians themselves, there is no trust, no belief that this is actually going to work. Now that leads us to the recognition internationally. What we are seeing is the rest of the world are saying the same thing that many Americans have said from the very beginning. This was a bad idea. It was poorly thought out. And now we are encountering problems which are only adding to the ongoing bill of this operation. In particular, there is Kate Phillips Barrasso of Mercy Corps, and she had something to say about this.
So we don't think that this maritime port will solve the problem. Yes, it will bring some additional aid into Gaza, but it will be nowhere near enough to solve the humanitarian challenge there.
So as Mercy Corps said very clearly, very definitively, this isn't going to fix the problem. It's a bigger problem, and the Biden-Harris administration didn't think it through. But that's only one organization. Besides the Associated Press, there's Bloomberg News that also went to experts and individuals about the situation. What is its status? Is it just a temporary problem? Is this an ongoing problem? Did the Biden administration fail completely, or is this just a bump in the road? Well, let's hear what they had to say.
When the U.S. announced that they were going to set up this pier, it was very clear to everyone involved that this was going to be a very expensive and politically meaningful gesture. But
it was expensive, $320 million, very expensive, politically meaningful. In other words, it was a virtue signal. This was targeted not towards Hamas, not even to the Palestinian people. It was targeting voters in Dearborn, Michigan. They admit this. They like to word it very nicely, but this was about politics. This was about virtue signaling. This was about the 2024 election. It really has very little to do with the Middle East, although it is inflationary.
That realistically, it wasn't going to solve some of the key logistical issues, which is finding safe, secure, and functioning roads to transfer that aid across the Gaza Strip and to bring it to the communities that need it most. So that's the first key challenge that they're dealing with.
So according to the Atlantic Council, the very first problem is this is a matter of logistics. It was always going to fail. It logistically was a bad idea. It wasn't thought out. We spent $320 million on a sudden political idea, virtue signaling, to try and get votes, and no one stopped to actually think, will it work? Which may explain why the rest of the world didn't help pay for the pier and weren't involved in building the pier, because they knew it was a failed idea from the start. Going on, Ms. Arbit says,
and so they are charging those trucks and grabbing things and engaging in what some are calling self-distribution, because again, they are desperate.
Self-distribution, in other words, looting. Now, the real question is the looting just by the Palestinian people, or is it also by Hamas, which again has a history of trying to take the food out of the mouths of the Palestinian people? No one is clear on that. And of course, as we can see, many of these political organizations are walking a tightrope to try and make this sound like there's success in failure, so we wouldn't expect them to point out the nature of Hamas, the historical nature of Hamas, in taking away from its very own people. But the San Francisco division of Bloomberg News had more to say about this.
Was this a flawed concept to begin with?
Look, this is an impossible situation. Given, as I said, the security situation in Gaza, the inability to ensure that anyone who is delivering that aid is going to be safe, destruction on roads, all of these other pieces. In many ways, this was mission impossible, but also mission necessary.
So it was mission impossible and mission necessary. She's stealing from movies. It's amazing that she's stealing from a movie, a rather good movie, but this is reality. Tom Cruise isn't going to come to the rescue. The fact is that it is mission impossible. This was flawed from the beginning, as the question asked pointed to. This was never going to work, and everyone knew it, except the American voters in Dearborn, Michigan, at Harvard University, at the colleges across America, like at Columbia, where they're protesting right now. This is exactly what they wanted, to get the pier made. They didn't really think about that this would actually achieve the goal of feeding the people of Gaza. But the revelations don't end there.
Comes next, because in light of what we have seen so far in the last 24 hours, Ireland, Norway, and Spain announcing that they would recognize a Palestinian state, and the subsequent Israeli recalling its ambassadors to those countries, not reacting well to this. I wonder, Carmel, if a number of sovereign countries saying that they would recognize a Palestinian state actually makes it less likely that that Palestinian state can be realized in the near term, because it only causes those currently in power to Israel to kind of retrench and circle the wagons and voice opposition to the idea of a two-state solution.
That's exactly right. The declaration of Palestinian statehood by countries, which, mind you, more than 100 countries, I think about 140, have already done that. But doing that in this moment, and generally, is deeply alienating for the Israelis, who feel that the Palestinians can't just be given this statehood recognition.
So the San Francisco division of Bloomberg Television decided to pivot and to ask about a two-state solution. Now, we have long said on this program, it is impossible to have a two-state solution. The reason isn't because of Israel, nor pressure that Israel is under. The reality is it's on Hamas. Hamas, by its charter, by its public declarations, and its acts of war, have made it clear they will continue to fight until they genocide Israel. That is a fact. That is what they have said. That is what they have done. You cannot have a peaceful nation bordering another nation if one wants to genocide the other. Israel isn't trying to genocide the Palestinian people. If they were, they would have already done so. No, the reality is it's Hamas that is trying to commit genocide against Israel with the support of Iran, and they have not been successful, thankfully. But it isn't the pressure that 140 nations have put on Israel. But let's be direct about this. The fact that Ireland and Norway and several other nations have come together to add pressure, along with 140 other nations, to say that the Palestinians should have a nation, Well, that doesn't change the inherent problem at the beginning, that the government of Gaza wants to genocide Israel. You cannot have peace in that scenario. And creating a state, a nation that wants to be at war, that wants to genocide its neighbor, is not conducive to peace. Who would agree to that? So looking at all the evidence that we can see, Joe Biden decided that he needed to virtue signal to the progressive base of the Democratic Party to be able to be competitive in swing states like Michigan. To be able to do that virtue signal, he pivoted within 2 days and made a statement to the nation during the State of the Union. It wound up costing the United States $320 million that we don't have, increasing inflation in the United States, though not substantially, but yet still increasing the inflation for the American citizens, to build a pier that doesn't work, that does not achieve the goal that it was meant to achieve, that never has been capable of achieving that goal according to international organizations and every study that has been done. It is a failed idea from beginning to end, which may explain why none of our allies in Europe, why none of the nations in the Middle East wanted to be involved. They didn't care, and they didn't think it would work, and it isn't working. But one thing is happening. The bill is getting bigger. We're spending more and more money. We haven't finished spending money on the pier in Gaza. That is something that the United States is incurring a constant cost. We have no end in sight on when that cost will be finished. And ultimately, the biggest question must be, is it worth it? Are we actually getting the job done? Many will say the money isn't worth it if we can save lives. But are we? So far, no, we are not. Realistically, according to the experts around the world, we're not likely to in the future either. And even the Palestinian people don't believe that this is going to work, that this is not the solution to their problem, short term or long term. So why are we doing this? Because Joe Biden needs something that he can try to claim is a success for the 2024 election so that progressives will have a reason to vote for him. That is, at the end of the day, the only reason why this was done. And just like all of the other items in the international policy of the Biden-Harris administration, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Sudan, Haiti, every time we look at his international policy, we see nothing but abject failure. The mainstream news media want to focus on any and every story except this one. But I think it's important. This is your money. This is inflation that's costing you more in everything that you buy, everything that you must pay for. This is increasing international tensions. It's going to affect us for decades to come. If we're going to waste our money, we at least could waste our money effectively and efficiently. Is that too much to ask for? What do you think about this situation? Has Joe Biden's virtue signal for Hamas, has it been effective? Has it been efficient in your understanding? Is this something, knowing today how much of a failure everyone expected it to be and how much of a failure it is actually becoming, would you have agreed to this if you were given the choice back in March? We look forward to seeing your comments.
No Soundbites Allowed is a podcast hosted by Michael Vass. The podcast focuses on providing in-depth discussions on various political and social issues. As the title suggests, the aim is to go beyond quick sound bites and explore topics in greater detail. Michael Vass, the host, engages with guests to analyze and discuss current events, policies, and political ideologies. The live stream and videos cover a wide range of subjects, including politics, economics, social issues, and more. By delving into longer, more comprehensive conversations, No Soundbites Allowed aims to provide listeners with a deeper understanding of the complexities surrounding contemporary issues. AI is listening. Shouldn't you know what AI knows? Aren't you tired of being treated like a child by major media parrots and want to be respected as an adult? There is nothing to lose and a lot to potentially gain, so check out No Soundbites Allowed on all major social media platforms.